Did you know that Dublin is a Unesco City of Literature? The fourth city in the world to have received this great accolade. This is a city that has nurtured, celebrated its writers, its storytellers, all its artists down through the years. We embrace them all. We're starting here at St. Patrick's, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the most famous people associated with the cathedral, and that was Jonathan Swift, author of Gulliver's Travels. This is the final resting place of Jonathan Swift. He was born here in Dublin in 1667. He studied at Trinity College. He became a Doctor of Divinity and became the Dean of St. Patrick's in 1713. So he served here until his death in 1745. It was during that time that all his major work was produced, and he is considered to be one of the greatest satirists in the English language. So here we are at Trinity College, which has a very long association with the literary tradition in Dublin. George Berkeley, the philosopher, was actually a librarian here. Outside the front gate there are statues of Edmund Burke and Oliver Goldsmith, who was a poet and a writer, also attended Trinity. Jonathan Swift was a student of Trinity College, as was Oscar Wilde and Samuel Beckett, who actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969. In more recent times, one of their graduates, John Boyne, had great success as a novelist. One of his novels, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, was actually made into a movie, and his novels are sold all over the world. Here behind me is one of the most iconic statues in Dublin. This is Oscar Wilde, who was born here in the city in 1854. And when he was 1, his family just moved around the corner here to number 1 Merrion Square. He became the darling of the London drawing rooms. He became so famous for his plays, for his works. Very tragic life, because he was prosecuted for homosexual offences and spent some time in Reading jail, and after his release travelled to Europe, where he died in Paris in 1900 at the age of 46. The statue is probably the most colourful one in the city, and we have plinths beside it with all these famous quotes from Oscar inscribed on them. Our National Library in Dublin has a permanent exhibition on the life and work of William Butler Yeats, who was born in Dublin. And towards the end of the 19th century, he was one of the people who spearheaded the Irish literary revival that culminated in the founding of the Abbey Theatre in 1904. Yeats actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. He was the first of 4 Irish writers to win that accolade. The exhibition is marvellous, and it is free of charge and charts his life from childhood all the way through to his death in the south of France in 1939. This is Patrick Kavanagh, born in County Monaghan, but came to Dublin when he was in his late 20s, basically to seek his fortune as a writer. He didn't get much in the way of acclaim in the early part of his life, but later on he became a very well-renowned poet and novelist. He was one of those people that had a knack of making ordinary life seem extraordinary. In one of his poems he says, "A swan goes by head low with many apologies. Fantastic light peeps through the eyes of bridges. And look, a bard comes, bringing from Athy and other far-flung places mythologies." Shortly after he married Florence Balcombe in this church, Bram Stoker then moved to London, where he managed the Garrick Theatre for Sir Henry Irving, one of the most famous actors of his day. He never actually achieved much in the way of success as a writer until after his death. One of our contemporary Dublin writers, Joseph O'Connor, has written a wonderful historical novel called Shadow Play, and it is really worth a read if you're interested in the life and times of Bram Stoker. This is a statue of George Bernard Shaw, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1926. And this statue is located right inside our National Gallery. The reason he's here is because before Shaw died, he left the royalties to 1/3 of all of his published works to the gallery, and that has enabled them to purchase works that they normally wouldn't have been able to afford. Seamus Heaney is probably one of Ireland's and Dublin's best-loved poets. He was born in rural County Derry in 1939. He attended school at St. Columba's College in Derry. One of his co-students at the time was John Hume, who later went on to win the Nobel Prize for Peace. So that little school in Derry actually had 2 Nobel Prize winners, because Seamus Heaney won the prize in 2005. He went on to be visiting professor of English at Harvard University, and he died in 2013. Seamus Heaney was actually very influenced by the works of Patrick Kavanagh, and having had a rural background himself, he was able to write poetry based on digging the peat bogs. He wrote about the bog bodies. He wrote about divining for water. He wrote of the anguish and grief of the loss of his 4-year-old brother in midterm break, one of my personal favourite poems. So I hope you've enjoyed that little introduction to some of our famous writers. We've literally only skimmed the surface. So why don't you come and visit us in Dublin and learn more about the fascinating writers?